Mr. Jones, please tell us about your military experience and the importance of OSINT operations nowadays, and also tell our readers what's the difference between OSINT, SIGINT, and SOCMINT operations.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. My name is Joseph Jones, and I come primarily from a British Army intelligence background. I spent 9+ years in the British Army Intelligence Corps, served in Afghanistan and Libya, and working across various different intelligence disciplines, several career breaks, and then I ended up working at, setting up my own company, OSINT, and which has now been acquired by Periscope. So my role at Periscope is training and capability development, especially within the area of OSINT, open source intelligence. And in terms of the disciplines themselves, OSINT, open source intelligence, is about the collection and the analysis of data or information that is coming from publicly available sources. Now, there's a little bit of, when we look at OSINT and when we define publicly available sources, we tend to ask the question, well, does that actually apply to social media? Because yes, it may not be publicly available in some parts, but it is publicly accessible. So can it still be defined within the OSINT sphere? And that is still an ongoing debate. Now, the interesting thing with OSINT is that it has various different subcategories, which themselves are the traditional intelligence collection disciplines. So, for example, humans, you can conduct human intelligence collection operations on open sources, primarily through social media. There is a slightly different term for that. It can be called covert internet operations, for example. SIGINT as well. You can use open sources to be able to collect open SIGINT data, whether that is, getting yourself a hold of a radio scanner and being able to listen in on various different open frequencies. Of course, it's still open source. So we're applying the use of SIGINT right there. And the same for geospatial intelligence as well. You can access geospatial data online. So again, it's open source. Now, SOCMINT, social media intelligence, is effectively a sub-discipline of OSINT, but it is in most respects a discipline in its own right as well. So SOCMINT involves purely social media data. So that is being able to go on to social media platforms and be able to do things such as effective searching, data collection, and analyzing the data from there as well. And why it is a sub-discipline of OSINT, but it could also be its own discipline in its own right, is because of the vast number of social media platforms out there. So when we talk about fusing social media data, that's where SOCMINT comes in. That's where you are taking data from social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, VK, OK, for example, and then fusing it together. Now, in my honest opinion, while there's a lot of talk, there's actually a lot of hype. There's been an explosion in the interest of open source intelligence since the outbreak, actually in the events leading up to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But from my observations, and again through my dealings with a lot of various different military components, we still haven't mastered the fusion of OSINT into all source intelligence disciplines. We simply haven't. And I think that, the one big lesson learned that we can take away from all of this is that there has to be a greater integration of OSINT into the wider all source intelligence collection and analysis activities.
We saw in the last years that disinformation has started to play a huge role on the battlefield. We saw that, for example, in the Nagorno-Karabakh war 2 years ago, and we are also seeing that now in the Russian-Ukrainian war at a large scale. So the platforms disinformation and fake news are spread through are Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, WhatsApp, and even Telegram. How can we identify the sources who spread false information, disinformation through these platforms?
Absolutely. It's what and most certainly, I mean, disinformation has been around for a very, very long time. It's not a new thing. And again, whether you call it disinformation or information operations very much depends on what side you are sitting on, I would say, because certainly when it comes to NATO and Western militaries, disinformation is a part of information operations. And again, we are referring to disinformation because we are being subjected to disinformation from, and I will say very directly, Russian state and state-sponsored actors. But since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we have seen an absolute explosion of disinformation. I do believe that it is on a scale that is simply huge, but more significantly, it's becoming very, very difficult for all of us, whether we are disinformation analysts or whether we are intelligence professionals. It's becoming increasingly difficult for us to be able to capture all of this information and to be able to literally analyze everything. Now, very specifically with regards to what we are seeing in Ukraine, and my observations is that the disinformation battlefield is taking place primarily on Telegram. And there is a very, very good reason for that. So when in the days before and after Russia decided to cross over the border into Ukraine, quite a lot of groups and channels were being created by Ukrainian communities. So, for example, we had several channels and groups focusing on Kiev, which was composed of residents in Kiev, and then the same for Mariupol and Odessa, and pretty much every single major town or city across Ukraine. And those groups and channels were absolutely instrumental in reporting Russian activities and reporting general activities. And they were also being used as a way, as a means by the Ukrainian government to keep everyone informed. And what we found was that the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, for example, they would release a statement, an update as to what is currently taking place. And that post would then be shared across all of the different Ukrainian groups and channels, and it was being used to inform everyone. At the same time, Russia very, very quickly realized, actually, that the Ukrainians are using Telegram to push their narrative. There's a lot of people in the West paying attention to Telegram at the moment. It is a source of near real-time information regarding the conflict. So what we saw was this explosion of pro-Russian and pro-invasion channels and groups, and they were being used to counter the official narrative coming from the Ukrainian government. It was absolutely significant. And what we've seen is this explosion, just literally, I would say the amount of such groups and channels, pro-Russian, pro-invasion groups and channels on Telegram, it is on a scale literally I have never seen before. And I spend, I would say, the majority of my time supporting various elements by collecting quite a lot of data and doing quite a lot of analysis. And there's only so much I can do because the number of channels and groups out there is just so huge. And how these Russian groups and channels operate is very much the same as how the Ukrainian channels and groups are operating. So we are seeing various different entities on Telegram, whether it is the Russian Defense Ministry or various other Russian institutions. Wagner Group, for example, there's a lot of groups concerning Wagner Group out there on Telegram, which are pushing out their own even more extreme narrative, which is quite disturbing in of itself. And also as well, I've noticed a lot of Russian influencers. There is one influencer in particular who is quite literally embedded within the Wagner Group. And that individual has a huge following on Telegram. And that individual is literally forwarding and resharing a lot of posts and communications, images and videos. And it is literally just being recirculated across all the various different channels and groups. So it is Russia's way of doing it. And I would say that it is literally on a scale I've never seen before. It's an explosion. For the other social media platforms, Facebook, yes, absolutely, but when it comes to the social media platforms that we are most familiar with, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, for example, we generally have to put our faith in the social media companies. We have to put our faith into Meta to be able to detect disinformation for us, which is not altogether that very useful. And when it comes to the metaverse, so to speak, specifically Facebook, I have found that the majority of pro-Russia, pro-invasion disinformation is being distributed via videos. Because again, what Russia has very quite rightfully identified is that the majority of us Facebook users, we have habits of going onto videos and scrolling through the videos. We don't generally pay attention. We don't generally search through Facebook or, use our news feed that very often. We're more interested in the videos. So that's where we tend to find Russia, various pro-Russia, pro-invasion actors putting out videos onto Facebook. Twitter is, again, another one. I mean, I've been monitoring several disinformation actors who are present on Twitter. They're still present on Twitter even to this day. And I don't want to really get into the whole argument regarding the recent takeover of Twitter, but I generally do see that we may find more disinformation actors going on to Twitter as a result, because it seems to have become slightly more relaxed and more free speech oriented, which is not a bad thing, but it creates an opportunity for actors, or influential actors or bots, if you like, to be able to spread this information across Twitter itself. VKontakte is another interesting one, but I generally see that VK is being used by Russia as its own influence platform. So it's not necessarily being used to spread disinformation beyond Russia's borders, so to speak. It's more about maintaining their own internal narrative and keeping their own people sort of content, if you like. I don't see it being used to spread further out beyond its sort of areas of influence. And the same could be said for odnoklasniki as well, to tell you the truth.
But is there any tool for us, normal users, to identify the sources behind these disinformation campaigns?
There are not dedicated tools, but there are ways. And unfortunately, there's not a one-size-fits-all tool that you can use to scan across every single social media platform, because there are many limitations. For example, when we look at social media for Facebook, for example, they're doing a lot of work to try and make it difficult for people like me, for professionals, to be able to use tools on social media to be able to identify said actors, because as far as Facebook is concerned, for example, or Metaverse, is that they want to do it themselves. That is a problem. But for Telegram, it's absolutely more possible. So there are several different tools out there that can be used. So the idea being is that you can scrape data from Telegram channels and groups. So the data that you can scrape are interactions, chats, for example. You can scrape the media. But more interestingly, though, where messages are being shared and reposted from other channels and groups, you can capture that information, you can scrape that data. And what you can then do is that you can follow the breadcrumbs. Now, how you do that depends on what tools you have access to. And again, it's pointing out that, I work for Periscope. So naturally, the tool that I use is Periscope Yos, because it is a data visualization tool. So I can take the data that I've scraped from Telegram, for example, so where I have a list of where messages have been posted and shared across other platforms, and I can put that into Periscope Yos, and then I'm able to visualize, connect the dots between them, I'm able to get to graphical representation of where this data is coming from. So what it relies on? It relies on us being able to scrape the data ourselves. And then it also relies on a data visualization tool. Now, in terms of identifying disinformation based on its text, we have to rely on what's called natural language processing, sentiment analysis, basically. So quite thankful, really, because what I use, Periscope Yos, has built-in natural language processing capabilities anyway. So it's able to detect through sentiment analysis where there are posts, for example, or text or chatter, which essentially fits into certain categories, whether it is the use of foul language or profanity, or where it's talking about extremism or violence, for example, or criminal activity. So these are capabilities that I can use. So I can very quickly filter down a lot of posts that I've obtained from Telegram to be able to identify those posts that have been shared from other channels or groups, and posts that have essentially been flagged from natural language processing. And again, as long as I have, whether it's data from Facebook, whether it's data from Twitter, if I can obtain that data, I'm able to put that data into an analysis tool, and to be able to identify posts that may be of intelligence interest. But for me, going online, if I open up a browser right now and I go on to, let's say, Facebook or Twitter, being able to, and I've got my news feed from Twitter up in front of me, am I able to look at a post and sort of know straight away whether it's fake news or not? No, I'm not able to. It's very, very difficult. And I think that is a part of the problem. That the social media companies are relying on themselves far too much. They think that they can do it all themselves, and they really can't. They really, really can't, because yes, they especially Meta, they can detect certain things, but as I have noticed, a lot of things are slipping through the net. That's the problem here.
but there are any legal limits or ethical considerations when it comes to gathering information from social media?
Absolutely. GDPR, for one, especially if we're living in the EU. So I live in Denmark, and I work in Sweden for Polyscope. And so I naturally have to abide by GDPR. And of course, I accept that. And I think that it's good. I'm not going to start by criticizing GDPR, because I think that's a good thing in protecting the rights of us, or not necessarily me, I'm British, but of you, especially as an EU citizen. But the huge limitation for us is that it creates an issue when it comes to us collecting data and analyzing that data. So in theory, if I have a purpose to collect and analyze that data, I can do so, but then obviously after a period of time, it has to be destroyed. Now, the issue that I take up with this is that Europe is in a period of war. The data that's being collected primarily are coming from servers located outside of Europe. The data that's being collected is against non-EU citizens, primarily against Russian citizens. And when I look at the face of this war, the events which are taking place, the awful events, the war crimes which are taking place, I do question whether Russia should have the same protections as EU citizens when it comes to GDPR. I think that is very unfair, especially on us as EU citizens, to tell you the truth. The legal protections that we have, why does that automatically apply to Russians, who are the instigators in this conflict? I don't think that it's entirely fair. And I do think that it is, when we look at the likelihood that we may lose data which contains crucial evidence concerning war crimes, for example, if said data has to be destroyed after a period of time, that is a problem. That's information regarding potential war crimes. So what do we do? Well, I truly do believe that, yes, GDPR is great. It is a privacy protection for us as EU citizens. But I do believe that Europe is at war. The face of the conflict and the dynamics of the conflict, how everything is literally online, and I would say majority of it is on Telegram. Telegram servers are located in the UAE. The instigators are Russian soldiers, Russian mercenaries. So I do think that it's time for us to look at GDPR and actually say, that GDPR should apply to Europeans or EU citizens, and that is it. I think that we really need to instigate some reform, because a lot of things could be missed. Crucial data could be deleted, data regarding war crimes, and the repercussions of that I do not want to imagine. So yes, we do have to respect GDPR, and I do respect GDPR, but I do genuinely believe that now is the time for us to look at it and put it into a realistic context, to say, what should it apply to and what shouldn't it apply to. And I think that the conflict that we're seeing in Ukraine at the moment is an example of where we have to we have to instigate reform to be able to enable us to collect so much data. And I appreciate that a lot of people will argue that, well, it shouldn't be up to a private citizen like me or like you to collect data regarding what's taking place in Ukraine. But what I can say for myself is that Ukraine has a very limited capacity to be able to collect that data, and they are relying on other people. And what I think is very heartwarming is that the moment Russia crossed the border into Ukraine, and we started to see footage of war crimes, absolutely horrendous acts being instigated by the Russian military, but also very specifically as well by Russian mercenaries, which is another thing altogether. You know, naturally, all of us in Europe flocked to help Ukraine, and that is something that Palescope did as well, and myself. And I'm very proud of that, because Ukraine only has a limited capacity. So they are relying on outside help. And of course, we should be able to help them because it's in our interests to do so. So, you know, that's why people like me, people like you, should have the ability to help the Ukrainians by collecting this data for them, and for them to be able to identify and analyze and document war crimes taking place in the country. It is extremely important.
Do you think that bad SOCMINT operations could change the course of a war? Could that influence the defeat or the victory of one part involved in the war?
It very much depends on the nature of the conflict. I served in Libya with the British Army, where influence operations was absolutely critical. And in fact, I would say that influence operations led to a lot of successes, which eventually led to the removal of Muammar Gaddafi. But that is an entirely different operational environment to Russia, Ukraine at the moment. But I do very much believe that there is always that possibility that if there is a concerted operation online, influence operation online, it could be enough to be able to inspire some people to question the whole justification of the war, if you can say it that. Does it sound far-fetched? Yes, it does. And the reason why is because I still think that even though we are looking at data and information, we are analyzing events taking place on the ground a lot more regularly and a lot more clearly than we were back in, well, actually, you know, early last year. The mist still hasn't settled. We still don't know for sure what the everyday Russian believes towards the war. We're only getting one side of the narrative, you know, and again, as we know, the narrative coming from Ukraine is very strictly controlled. And that's a problem. We simply do not know. In theory, yes. You know, you can apply influence, information operations and influence operations to alter the course of the war and turn it in our favor. It is an established military doctrine. You can do that. Whether it would work in the conflict as we're looking at right now, I don't know. Probably not yet, but potentially in the medium to long term, yes, it could be achieved. Now, in terms of sort of disinformation, sort of altering the course of the war for against Ukraine, I don't believe that happening. And the reason why is because I truly do believe that the resilience of the Ukrainian people is on a scale we have never seen before. And my interactions with Ukrainians simply proves that they do believe that there's going to be a victory for them. They really do believe that, and I believe it as well. Their resilience is truly admirable, and they know what's true and what's not. They really, really do. So I don't believe that you know, we're going to see this information altering the course of events in Ukraine against the Ukrainians. Whether it can be applied the other way around, influence operations against Russia, potentially, but we still don't know. It's still far too early. But again, it is an established military doctrine, And if I was still working in the military, that would be something that I would be looking at very closely, to look at opportunities for us. What could we do?
2 days ago, after the Ukrainians attacked the Russian forces in Makivka, the Russian Defense Ministry told the media that the reason the Russians were attacked was the fact that they were using their mobile phones. So the Ukrainians were able to track their location and attack them. Do you think that's a relevant reason? And what could that tell us about the way Russians operate in Ukraine?
Absolutely. Now, the Russian military put in a blanket ban on mobile devices, unauthorized personal mobile devices. But a lot of Russian soldiers have either disregarded that ban, or they've acquired their own devices in occupied eastern Ukraine. So, you know, in terms of that, it does not surprise me, to say the least. And I know that some Russian military, and also some of the sort of Russian mercenary Wagner group elements, they are applying some strict ComSec. So, you know, they are abiding by this overall ban, and making sure that they're not broadcasting their location. But it does not surprise me that the attack took place, because I absolutely know that it is possible to be able to identify a person's location from their mobile phone device, not just from their mobile phone device, but from several apps as well. You know, for example, dating apps. There are some dating apps where, you know, you can get an idea of who's within your vicinity, so to speak. So you can apply a GPS spoofing capability or application, spoof your GPS, and then you can see who's located within a particular proximity. And then you can apply a very straightforward logic to be able to essentially get a more accurate location of said individual by searching across various different data points. So that is what I believe has taken place, and which is one of the reasons why we've seen the strike go in. And I would say that, you know, again, it's thinking outside of the box. Whether they were tracking the particular mobile phone device, or whether they were tracking it via a particular app that was being used by said Russian soldiers, I don't know. But I do believe that it may be the latter. So again, absolutely, you can get an idea of a person's location, and that is open source intelligence that's been applied there.
Okay, thank you so much.